5 seconds. That's all it took. 5 seconds of high-definition security footage to blow up every theory, every suspect list, every safe prediction we had made for the last 3 weeks. 5 seconds, and the entire WWE landscape is on fire. What is going on, Wrestling Apocalypse Nation? Welcome back. I am your host, and if you are watching this video right now, you already know that SmackDown last night was not a wrestling show. It was an execution. It was a public trial. It was Nick Aldis walking into that ring with a manila folder in the righteous fury of a man who hasn't slept in 2 days, and by the time he was done, one of the most decorated superstars on the entire roster had just become the most wanted man in the company. For weeks we have been absolutely consumed by a single, haunting image. Main event Jey Uso, the heartbeat of Friday nights, the man who made Yeet a battle cry for an entire generation of wrestling fans buried under a mountain of steel trusses and black production crates in a cold, dark loading dock like he was nothing, like he was cargo. We sat in this very chair, and we gave you every suspect. We gave you the bloodline theories. We gave you the Jacob Fatu conspiracies. Some of you in the comments, and I see you even had CM Punk on your lists. But none of us, not a single one, put our chips on him. The Ring General. Gunther. The man who reigned over Raw for over 500 days. The man who beat legends with his bare hands and called it a public service. Tonight, SmackDown General Manager Nick Aldis didn't just reveal a name. He revealed a monster. And we are going to break down every single second of this, because the road to Wrestlemania has just been detonated. Let's get into it. Now, before we even get to the footage, I need to talk about the atmosphere in that building last night, because it was different. From the moment the pyro hit and the show opened, there was a tension in the air that you could feel through your television screen. The crowd knew something big was coming. Rumors had been leaking all week. Our sources here at Wrestling Apocalypse had been telling you in our community posts that this week's SmackDown was circled on every producer's whiteboard with a big red marker. Something was going to break. And when Nick Aldis's music hit, not a superstar's music, not a dramatic video package cold open, but the general manager's music, the crowd went from buzzing to dead silent almost instantly. That is rare, folks. Wrestling crowds do not go quiet. They pop, they boo, they chant, they do not go quiet. But they went quiet for Nick Aldis last night because everyone in that building understood, on instinct, that what was about to happen was real. This was not a storyline. This was not a worked shoot. This was a man in a suit with a folder in his hand and the controlled fury of someone who has been lied to. Aldis usually carries himself with that polished, diplomatic energy, the voice of authority without the thunder of a performer. But last night he was a different animal. He gripped the top rope like he was considering snapping it with his bare hands. He told the crowd, and I want everyone to hear this clearly, he told the crowd that the sanctity of the locker room had been violated. He said, "I have spent 48 hours in a dark room with the forensic digital team, and what I'm about to show you is not just a violation of WWE policy, it's an assault on the soul of this industry." The soul of this industry. Think about that language. That's not a suspension announcement. That is a man declaring war on behalf of an entire roster. The lights dimmed to that cold, surgical white, no dramatic music, no countdown timer, and when the big screen flickered on, the collective gasp of 10,000 people sounded like wind through a canyon. Let's talk about this footage, because I have watched it approximately 40 times at this point, and every single time I see something new. Every time I catch a new detail that makes my stomach drop a little further. The footage begins grainy night vision green, the way all loading dock security cameras look at 2 in the morning, and you see Jey Uso first. He's leaning against a production case, clearly exhausted. This was post-match. His gear is still on. His wrist tape is half undone. He's got that 1,000-yard stare that wrestlers get after they've left everything in that ring, and he's just recovering, just breathing, just being a human being in a quiet hallway before he goes and does all the press stuff. And then, from the deep shadow in the back left corner of the frame, and this is the detail that nobody was talking about on social media last night, but I need you to go back and watch it. There's a moment about 4 seconds before you can actually see the figure where the shadow shifts. He was already there. He was already standing in that corner, in the dark, waiting. This wasn't opportunistic. He didn't stumble across Jey. He was already there, positioned, patient. Like a predator who had scouted the territory and chosen the exact moment to strike. And when the figure moved, it wasn't frantic. That is the part that will keep me up at night. There was no rage. There was no emotion. It was mechanical. It was rhythmic. He approached the base of the lighting rig the same way a contractor approaches a demolition site, with purpose, with knowledge, with the absolute certainty that he had done his research and he knew exactly what was going to happen next. He struck the support pin. Wade Barrett pointed this out on commentary, and I think it's the most chilling observation of the night. Gunther struck the specific support pin that would cause the maximum collapse weight to hit Jey's torso without being immediately fatal. He didn't want to kill him. He wanted to message him. And then the light shifted, and we saw the face. That cold, unblinking, completely serene stare of Gunther. He wasn't breathing hard. His jaw wasn't clenched. He looked like a man who had just finished filing paperwork. And as the trusses came down on Jey and we could hear the sickening crash even through the tinny security camera audio, Gunther did something that I genuinely believe is going to be a defining image of 2026 in professional wrestling. He walked over to the rubble. He adjusted his lapels. And he deliberately stepped on the steel beam pinning Jey's chest. Not to hurt him more. Not out of rage. He did it to make a point. He did it so that when Jey Uso regained consciousness under 500 pounds of steel, the last physical sensation he could remember was Gunther's weight pressing down on top of all of it. The ring general didn't want to win a fight. He wanted to install a hierarchy. He wanted Jey Uso and everyone watching to understand that a main event is just a title to Gunther. And titles mean nothing unless you have earned them in blood and discipline. Now let's talk about what happened after that video played, because the in-ring stuff was only half the story last night. Our sources here at Wrestling Apocalypse were working overtime, and what we are hearing from Backstage is that the fallout was instantaneous, chaotic, and depending on who you talk to, genuinely frightening. The Bloodline lost their minds. We are talking about Jimmy Uso and Solo Sikoa, and I want to be very clear, this wasn't some scripted backstage segment for the cameras. The people who were back there, our veteran sources, are telling us that Jimmy and Solo had to be physically restrained by 20 security personnel from going straight to Gunther's locker room. And here is the fascinating psychological layer of that: it wasn't out of brotherly love for Jey. You know the history. You know the civil war that tore that family apart. The Bloodline. Gunther didn't just attack a man, he disrespected a legacy. He put his boot on the chest of an USO, and as far as Solo Sikoa is concerned, that is a declaration of war on the entire family. One veteran producer, who has worked in this company for over a decade, told us privately that the vibe backstage right now is icy. That's the word they used. Icy. Like everyone is waiting for the volcano to erupt and they're just standing as far back as they can while they wait. Gunther's locker room was apparently locked, just him, alone, in silence, while the rest of the building was in absolute chaos around him. And that image alone tells you everything you need to know about his psychology right now. He isn't rattled. He isn't hiding. He's finished and he went back to his room. I need to take a moment here, because I think in all the chaos and the excitement of the reveal, we are in danger of losing sight of the human element at the center of the story. And that is Jey Uso. Main event Jey Uso. Right now, as we record this, Jey Uso is in a local medical facility with multiple fractured ribs and a potential spinal bruise. Let that sit with you. A spinal bruise. That is not storyline injury language. That is a real human being who could have been permanently damaged in that loading dock. We're hearing the word months thrown around in terms of his recovery timeline, and I want to be honest with you, that is devastating for so many reasons. Because Jey Uso's rise over the last 2 years has been one of the most genuinely joyful stories this industry has produced in a long time. This was the guy who spent years in the shadow of Roman Reigns, years as the loyal soldier, the man who stood in his cousin's corner and took the punishment and smiled through it, because that's what you did in the Bloodline. And then, slowly, painfully, magnificently, he broke free. He found his own voice. He found Yeet. He found the crowd. And the crowd found him back in a way that you simply cannot manufacture, because authenticity in wrestling is the rarest currency there is. Jey brought something to Friday nights that is incredibly hard to quantify. He made people feel good. In a landscape that is often so dark and so brutal and so morally gray, Jey Uso was pure. He was hope. He was the guy who proved that you could escape the gravitational pull of your family's sins and become something entirely your own. Gunther didn't just attack a wrestler. He attacked a symbol. And that is why this story has resonated so deeply, so quickly. Gunther's message is clear: flashy entrance music and crowd love do not equal legitimacy. If you are not here for the sport, for the craft, for the discipline, for the mat, then you are a parasite on the body of professional wrestling, and he will remove you. Jey, in Gunther's eyes, is everything wrong with the modern product. And he just made that statement in the most brutal, theatrical way possible. This brings me to the part of the breakdown that I find the most intellectually fascinating, and also the most genuinely unsettling: the ideology of Gunther. Because Gunther has never been a simple villain. He has never been a villain who is evil for the sake of being evil. Gunther is a villain who is right about everything except the methods. His philosophy has always been the mat is sacred. He believes sincerely, genuinely believes that professional wrestling is a martial discipline that has been cheapened by entertainment, by character work, by catchphrases and merchandise and crowd interaction. He believes that the only true currency in this sport is toughness, technical mastery, and the willingness to suffer and inflict suffering in equal measure. He has made that case in every promo he has ever cut, and he has backed it up in every match he has ever wrestled. And here is the uncomfortable truth that the purists in our community have been saying in the comments, and I'm going to say it too, even though it makes me a little uncomfortable. Gunther isn't entirely wrong about Jey Uso being a product of the entertainment machine. Jey's rise was driven by crowd connection, by personality, by the organic magic of a catchphrase that caught fire. That's not a criticism of Jey, that is modern wrestling, that is the art form at its highest level. But from Gunther's perspective, Jey is the living embodiment of everything that has diluted his sport. But here's where Gunther crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. He took that ideology and he weaponized it. He decided that the mat wasn't enough of a stage to make his point. He went into the dark, into the loading dock, and he used steel and shadow to deliver his verdict. He became judge, jury, and executioner. And by doing so, he has proven that he is no longer a competitor operating within the system. He is a threat operating outside it. And that makes him infinitely more dangerous and infinitely more compelling than anything we have seen on SmackDown in years. Let's check the temperature of the internet, because it has been boiling since last night. Within minutes, I mean within literal minutes of the unmasking, hashtag Gunther the Butcher was trending at #1 worldwide. Not just in wrestling circles worldwide. The mainstream sports media picked this up. Entertainment outlets picked this up. The clip of Gunther stepping on that steel beam has over 12 million views on social media at the time we are recording this, and that number is going to look small by this time tomorrow. The discourse is already splitting into fascinating camps. You have the outrage crowd, the people calling for immediate suspension, calling Gunther a coward, saying he should be fired and stripped of every accolade. And then you have the purists, and this camp is louder than I expected, who are saying that Jey Uso was distracted and soft, and that Gunther simply did what a general does, which is find the weakness in the enemy and exploit it without hesitation. The most interesting debate I am seeing is this one: is this the greatest heel positioning of 2026, or has Gunther gone so far, so genuinely dangerous far, that there is no traditional wrestling redemption arc available to him? Can you come back from a spinal injury angle? Can you ever work face after this? I don't think you can. I don't think Gunther wants to, and I think that is precisely the point. I have to give a special mention to the commentary team last night, specifically to Wade Barrett, because he did something that genuinely surprised me. Barrett is, almost without exception, the voice in wrestling commentary who will find the logic in the heel's actions and make the case for them. He has been doing it for years. It's his brand. It's what he does brilliantly. But last night, Barrett went quiet. Michael Cole was shouting about cowardice, which is exactly what you'd expect. But Barrett sat there in silence for what felt like a full 10 seconds after the footage played. And then he said something that I think is the single most important line of commentary of the entire year so far. He said, slowly and quietly, he knew exactly which support pin to pull. That's it. That's all he said. And in that one sentence, Barrett the heel apologist communicated that this wasn't passion, it wasn't rage, it wasn't even cruelty in the traditional sense. It was engineering. It was premeditation at its coldest. Even Wade Barrett couldn't spin it. And that tells you everything. So where do we go from here? Because this isn't just a great reveal, this is a structural earthquake for the road to WrestleMania, and we need to talk about the chess pieces that are now moving on the board. First, Jey Uso's return. The question isn't if he returns. We know he returns. The question is what version of Jey Uso comes crawling out of that hospital bed. You do not get crushed under 500 pounds of industrial steel and come back dancing. You do not come back with heat. You come back with something to prove in a way that goes so far beyond a title match that the title almost becomes irrelevant. We are looking at a man who was nearly broken physically, professionally, symbolically, and who now has to decide who he is on the other side of that. The best stories in wrestling come from that exact crucible. And I believe the version of Jey Uso who eventually faces Gunther is going to be a version of this character we have never seen before. Second, Imperium. Ludwig Kaiser and Giovanni Vinci were noticeably, conspicuously absent from that security footage. And I do not think that is an accident. Either Gunther acted entirely alone, which would make him even more terrifying, a man so convinced of his own righteousness that he doesn't even trust his soldiers to execute it, or Kaiser and Vinci were positioned elsewhere deliberately, giving Gunther deniability within his own faction. Either way, the Imperium subplot here is enormous, and I have a feeling we are going to see fracture lines develop within that group before this is done. Third, Nick Aldis. The general manager is now personally invested in this. He used the words "soul of this industry." He spent 48 hours in a dark room with a forensic team. This man is not going to simply issue a fine and move on. Aldis is going to want blood for this, institutionally speaking. And a SmackDown GM with a personal vendetta against the most dangerous man on the roster is appointment television for the next 10 weeks. And then there is the wild card that nobody is fully accounting for yet: the bloodline. I mentioned the backstage chaos earlier, but let's think about this more carefully. Solo Sikoa and Jey Uso were not trying to get to Gunther's locker room because they love G. The family tree is still fractured and bleeding from everything that happened over the past 2 years. But Gunther has now done something that may be the most politically stupid thing he could have done in terms of self-preservation. He gave the bloodline a common enemy. When you give fractured people a mutual enemy, the fractures close. Temporarily. Just long enough to become devastating. Gunther may have just accidentally handed Solo Sikoa and Jey Uso the justification they needed to go nuclear on him, and he may have also again accidentally planted the seeds for a G reunion with his family. Not because of love. Because of war, and that is the most interesting version of all of these characters we could possibly get. Listen, we are going to be tracking every development from this story around the clock. G's medical reports, Gunther's response, Aldis's punishment ruling, Imperium's movements, the bloodline's next steps, all of it, every hour, right here on Wrestling Apocalypse. This community has been the sharpest, most passionate group of minds in wrestling analysis, and moments like this are exactly why we do this. I want to hear from you. Down in the comments right now, did you see this coming? Was Gunther on your suspect list, or did this hit you like 500 pounds of steel trusses on a cold loading dock floor? And more importantly, what should the punishment be? Does Nick Aldis strip him of his status? Do we get a cage match? A casket match? A last man standing at Wrestlemania where the only rule is that you have to be conscious enough to walk out of the arena under your own power to win? I want your dream match, I want your dream stipulation, and I want your hottest take, no matter how extreme, because this moment deserves extreme takes. If this video fired you up the way this story fired us up, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that this content matters, and it helps us keep the lights on while we dig through the shadows of the WWE for the truth. Smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we are entering the hottest stretch of the wrestling calendar, and you do not want to miss a single update. The apocalypse isn't coming, folks. It already arrived. It showed up in a dark loading dock in a nice suit, adjusted its lapels, and left without saying a single word. I've been your host for Wrestling Apocalypse. Watch your back. Stay loud. And we will see you at the next bell.